Hello.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. See, we have a full agenda today, and it's in the order that we will do it. I might like to start off with a preface. So here we are. I want to remind everyone that we have something that we ought to be shipping soonish. And I think we need to start realizing that some of these debates we're having are things that are not going to get resolved, and we can think about which things we have to prioritize for getting some users to try this out. I think that this is a little bit, I'm getting a little bit of pressure on this from my company, because there are some discussions we're having that are really about nice things to have in the future, and some of these discussions that we're having are about like getting it to work in October. So I think we should just all keep this in mind, is that we're going to have to cut something that's GA soon, I think, and maybe the views proposal is not going to make it as a requirement for that point. But I want us to figure out how we can kind of separate the progress on views from the GA a little bit. So that's my preface here. And, but we're close, we're really close here. The OTLP questions that we're going to just talk about in the middle of this meeting are kind of blockers for getting something to GA. And sort of the view stuff may not be, I think, and that can be debated. And also, I think semantic conventions are things that we can keep debating as we get something that actually, all you need is, like, I have some counts and I need to report them. I have some gauges and I need to report them. So we need to remember that. That said, it's the reason we're having these debates is that they're important, and the value of open telemetry is that, that everyone has a voice. So we need to talk through these. And so with that, I want to hand this over to Graham Fuller, talk about HTTP metrics, I think, and take it away.
Thank you, Josh. I'll try and keep this concise. I wanted to make sure that we're aligned in terms of the spec, the HTTP metric semantic spec, on kind of what it is and what it isn't. I added a couple sentences to the top of the spec to try to clarify this for readers. It pretty much says that the spec describes what the metrics should look like for an HTTP operation and avoids describing how those metrics are generated. There was mention last time that there needed to be like a full-blown discussion about the metric pipeline before this spec should get merged. I agree that there needs to be a discussion about the metric pipeline, but it shouldn't block this spec. We don't want the spec to describe the metric pipeline at all.
Yeah, I've come around to agree with you on that. Like, there's this, for example, like there's a HTTP duration or something like that. And you can talk about ways that a views API will let you generate accounts from that. But it's totally interfering with the GA date, I think. And it's interfering with the semantics discussion. So you're right, Graham. We should be able to talk about what we want and now about how we're going to get them, because maybe in 6 months or a year, we have a Fuse API and you can reconfigure so that instead of having 4 metrics in your plugin, you have 1 metric instrument in your plugin, and you still generate 4 metrics. But that's going to be down the road, and it won't change the semantics of these metrics.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I don't think that's the job of the spec at all. And the spec, should define, what we're expecting and not how to do it. So with that being said, does that like clarify things in terms of the goal of the spec?
I agree. I would like others to comment though. I know that we also have Justin on the call who's been involved in some semantics work for duration-like events or span-like events. So I want to make sure that we're both getting a voice, or both of you are having a voice here. But I intend to stand out of the way, and I agree with you.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement. Graham and I are both from New Relic. We've talked about this. I think everyone from New Relic.
I didn't actually realize that. That's good to know.
Yeah. I also submitted an OTEP, just kind of also trying to describe kind of what the point of these PRs is going to be. I feel like maybe this was a misstep not to have submitted that OTEP before. But I would love for us to just agree that this is a sort of spec that we would like to have. And that Graham's PR is an example of one of these specs. And I had an older PR, there's kind of generic semantic conventions for timed operations, and I am kind of the opinion that that one should be closed, and that this OTEP describes what it was trying to say, and then Graham's HTTP PR is more detailed, and then we'll have follow-on PRs about databases and gRPC, et cetera.
And then the thing that I've changed my opinion on in the last couple of months is this statement here that we can use a single value recorder to get lots of information out, but that is causing us to slow down and causing debate, which I think is unnecessary. And so Graham's point is well taken. It's like semantically, it doesn't matter whether you use 1 instrument or 4. The point is you get 4 instruments, 4 metrics out. So we should not be specifying what the instruments are. We should be specifying what the aggregations are. And this actually is also the direction that OTLP has been moving. We don't know what the instrument was. We know what the data looks like. So should we have any specific conversations here? I think that when this came up, wait a second.
So I addressed all the.
I may have talked you out of having a HTTP server.request count, and maybe that's where I'm sort of realizing I made an error. There were questions here about whether we're duplicating the semantic conventions for span HTTP requests. I don't think that that's the intention here. But I gather what we were trying to do is limit cardinality up front, essentially. Does that sound right?
Yeah, a lot of this is poured from spans, so it's possible to create this stuff from spans, but we explicitly avoided that, writing that into here in case spans don't exist.
And so this can be then read as if you were generating a metric from an HTTP span, you'd probably just copy these attributes out. If you are creating a metric from a HTTP handler, then you'd just generate these attributes and probably nothing else, because anything else is going to be high cardinality, and we know we don't want those for metrics, basically speaking. Yeah.
Yep.
So I think when a person who's been familiar with the trace semantic convention sees this, they might exactly run into the question I just raised about, like, what are you doing? Are you respecifying something? But I think there might be like a sentence up at the top that could be added to prevent that confusion, I think, just to say that these are the same conventions. These are just the recommended labels for metrics from HTTP events, which are restricted to those which we believe are low cardinality, I guess.
Although, at the top of the spec or the PR?
In the spec is what I was thinking. Okay. Just to avoid confusion over are these the same conventions or are these different? In other words, we're not making semantic conventions in this list. These are the same ones that are already specified. That's true? Yeah. Okay, you're nodding. I agree. Well, I support this. Is there like a recommendation, like what do we need to do to satisfy this? Is this like we go to the OT HTTP plugins and start writing metric instruments in there with these labels?
Yeah, we could do that, or add
or
to
you could
the
implement
Java.
a span to metric event somewhere in the pipeline, like a collector. You could have a collector plugin that would take a span and turn it into a metric using these labels.
Yeah, something like that. That would be kind of the next steps in terms of implementing this. Yeah.
Later in this call, if we have time, I want to talk a little bit about what I call dimensionality reduction. You could imagine a configuration where there's an HTTP span being output. It has these attributes and more, and then you configure a label reduction to say, I only want these in my metrics, and it'll cut out the ones that you decide not to. In other words, you'd have a list of all the methods that you want, and it would just collapse to those dimensions. That's another example of there's many ways we can do this. We just need a smooth convention. Doesn't matter how we're going to do it. So I should stop saying such things. Okay, well, I will be happy to add an approval to this after the call. I think the request is that everybody else who's here, and especially if you're an approver, to go give that one a look in the spec repo. Graham and Justin, do you think there's anything else we should talk about here? Also for Justin's OTEP. This whole category, I think, is something that we need to keep our attention on, but we also, this is an example where I think we can make progress towards GA without settling all these details, because what people want to see when we GA is a metric library that works and not a finished set of conventions, I think. So, so let's just remember that. Otherwise, I think this is great. We should make sure that I saw some comments on this PR by, let's see, who was it? People who, over on 00, he's worked a lot on the Senate conventions for HTTP. So that's his concern. That's why I recommended sort of a statement to address the concern that he gave, although you have resolved the issue already. So maybe he's accepted it.
Well, I marked it as resolved because he didn't respond after 6 days.
Okay.
But I can add a sentence to the top of the spec.
Okay, I'll get in there and try and help. I can ask him to address it if not. Okay, I'll make a note to come back to this one. Okay, thank you, Justin and Graham. Now I think we should talk about Vue's proposal. John, you want to take it away?
Yeah, so this I think will be really quick because neither Bogdan nor Tristan are here. But maybe
we need Bogdan here, darn it. Okay.
Yeah, I know.
Let me see if I can get him.
So I cut it down to 5 minutes because I don't think we have the right people here. But basic idea, 126 is proposing this super basic idea, which is kind of a stepping stone to views. And then 128 is Tristan's take on doing kind of a combination of that plus a full views proposal. And the question that is left on 126 is, do we keep 126? Do we get that merged, build that spec, and then have 128 build on that? Or do we take 128 and make it the official OTEP with both parts in it, get that merged, and then write two separate, like break the spec writing up into 2 steps? And that's really, it's more of just a procedural thing. I think everyone kind of agrees that what we've got here is something we need to build. We have a stepping stone we can do simply. We probably might, I think actually we need to have something akin to it for GA to at least allow exporters to be configured correctly. Although I could be argued out of that. And I think full views, I think could be beyond GA, in my opinion, but without Tristan working here, I think it's hard to assert that.
I share that attitude. I feel that there's some minimum amount that we ought to have to choose. Like, I was thinking label reduction, like because of we know that the cardinality can be a problem. Having a kind of really coarse tool to just like limit label cardinality would be very, very useful, and that needs to be configurable. We know about configuring cumulative versus delta for certain exporters. We know about configuring various options of aggregator as well. And I think that there are
You're probably disabling, like being able to disable an aggregation altogether.
Disable an aggregation, yeah. Those are like the core minimum, I think. And then there's lots of nice to haves that are on top of that, like getting labels out of your context or like multiple aggregations. And I've been thinking in the back of my head about multiple aggregations. There's some reason why that seems problematic to me, and I've come up on an answer, I think. And I don't know if anyone cares to hear it, but I'm starting to worry about multiple aggregations just because we've been having a lot of debate over OTLP recently. I'm not sure that OTLP is ready for it.
That's an interesting question. Sounds like something we should, I mean, without Bogdan and Tristan here, we should probably defer that discussion.
Yeah. I'll give you an example though. There's some notion of like a frame that I want to add to this conversation, which is to say that if I have two aggregations of one metric, I want to make sure that I don't add them together. Like I can compute different sample strategies to compute different samples from the same data. I don't want them to look like two data streams. And it's like, so I want some way of like recognizing that I'm outputting multiple versions of the same data so that I don't count them multiple times in an aggregation. Like I don't want to re-aggregate and combine data that was already extrapolated from the same metric. And I don't know how we're going to do that. So I think that alone cautions me on multiple aggregators. So that's just a warning that I had. But I think, and if Bogdan's not here, we're going to have trouble talking through the next section.
I'm
Oh, you're here. Welcome.
I'm here for 5 minutes since you emailed me. Sorry, I was in a meeting.
Good. I got you.
Discussing with the TC members about how can we make specs move faster. I'm trying. Sorry, I joined this.
Okay, great. Sorry. Okay, well, what I was about to finish with talking to John here about some minimum amount of views configuration is that I think that I see that as the MVP, but it's just got to be minimal. And I don't think we need multiple aggregations. I don't think we need distributed context. I don't think we need a lot of stuff, but configuring labels, aggregations, and disablement is I think what I'm looking at. For me, that sounds right. And another, at the beginning of this hour, I prefaced this with we got to march towards GA, and there's some things here that don't need to block us. And I think there's some of the views proposal ought not to block us. And maybe you're right that some small subset of it is something we get to. To that end, I'm going to talk about dimensionality reduction below, because I think that's in it for me. And I realize that we haven't finished it. So, but first, we should talk about this next section, blockers, and then the OTLP protocol. I don't know who added this section on 171. Are these the same? Oh.
Josh, I added this Pinkland. I added this part. I think, can you hear me?
Please.
Hey, Josh, I'm from AWS.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a discussion a couple of weeks ago. I think 2 of them get resolved. I'm just curious if we can go GA. Those 2 are the open ones, 159 and 171. Just curious, are they still blockers before go to GA to get the proposal finalized?
So
well, I think this. Go ahead, Bogdan.
This one is merged. 171 is already merged.
Okay.
It's resolved. 159, I was providing a bunch of comments, and I was asking Josh for helping me with these labels and how exemplar labels combine with the data point labels. Once we have them in the same data point, are we gonna apply some? Are we gonna duplicate them in the exemplars, or are we just gonna do a merging of them? I don't know exactly what it is the right thing to do, but we need some decision here. And anyway, trying to make progress on this. So I think this is personally, this is not a blocker for calling the protocol stable, because adds on top of the current protocol. It does not change anything, anything inside the protocol for the moment. There are other blockers, in my opinion, but this one is not a blocker. It's something that we can add at any moment, and
yeah, I would agree with that. It's backwards compatible. This is not a blocker for us. This is in the category of things that I think we will one day want or should have in OTLP, but it's like getting in the way of GA, and I realize that we've got to cut away things that we can. That said, Connor has been working on this work and has a prototype that is looking good, and I was intending to talk about it below. So I think we can resolve this question, but I think we should move on for this meeting. So at the end, we can talk about this, or we can talk about this in offline, and I'll take the point on it.
Okay, thank you, Josh.
Josh, just try to comment there. I'm very interested in making that happen, but just give me some hints about what to do there.
Yeah, no, I will follow this one later today. Hopefully at the end of the hour we can talk about it, because I have a connection there at the bottom about dimensionality reduction. So, but let's talk through the OTLP stuff, the 191 through 195.
All of them, I think, are merged and reviewed by a bunch of people, at least 4 or 5, except the ones that I removed some to-dos and stuff. I didn't wait for too many approvals, because I do not believe that that's very important. But besides that, everything else was reviewed at least by 4 or 5 people, and they merged them.
Cool.
There are two issues that I know of. If you look into the proto, there is a enum standard, which I'm working right now.
Wait, where shall I look?
So in the issues, in the proto issues, there is a issue about the namings of the enum entries.
Ah, yeah.
The one, the bottom of the page. No. The bottom of the page. That one. Yes, that one is a blocker. I need to go through all the protos and do a small breaking change and just follow some convention. I will try to find.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I will try to find what exactly the convention is. There is the other one that I need to do, which is the performance thing, but that does not change that will not change behavior. That will just change how we encode things, but hopefully I will make sure it's not changing things. There are in the specs.
Cool.
There are in the specs 2 issues which I don't get feedback, and I would like people to help me with that. In the specification, there is the issue. I will give you the numbers immediately. So metrics. In the specification, the ones that I'm interested in is the default changing OTLP exporter to export cumulative metrics by default. This does not affect OTLP, but I think one decision that we made, and we want to make sure everyone agrees on, we support both. We support deltas and we support cumulative. This issue is more and only about what is the default behavior of our SDK, which we can change. I'm not opposed to that, and we can discuss pros and cons, but from OTLP perspective, does everyone agree that we support both? I know, Josh, you say yes, I say yes, but I want to hear if others have other opinions.
Yes, and I'd like to ask Yang to speak, because he was mentioning a OTEP to drive this even more. So maybe we need an OTEP to say this. Are you on the call?
Yes. Yeah. So pretty much, I had an OTEP draft that pretty much just formalizes and summarizes like the discussion that has been going on in the SIG meetings for these weeks, and it pretty much just says that the SDK OTLP exporter should support should be configurable to have the cumulative and delta export strategies, which means that the OTLP metric will support both, and that the default is cumulative. I haven't followed that yet. Yeah, so
okay.
Pretty much what you've said, Bogdan.
Perfect. Then,
so yeah, your OTEP would resolve this issue, I think.
Okay. There needs to be a follow-up in the specification. I think we say somewhere in the API that the default is Delta, but there may be a change in the
So
specs.
I don't know where. So in truth, I mean, one of the elephants in the room is I keep saying I'm going to work on SDK spec, and I keep saying we're not ready, but I think we're ready. I think that's where you put such a spec. I wanted us to have a pass-through, which means no memory in the client, but it's just not going to work until we have a much more mature downstream infrastructure. So I think until we have a configurability that can automatically decide based on downstream conditions, we should just set the default to be cumulative and worry about this as we go forward.
Perfect. Perfect.
And then back to John's statement is we do need some minimum amount of configurability. And what I understand is that I think that there are vendors like New Relic that would prefer to just see deltas for the time being. And I know a few other vendors that are in that boat. And so if we can just say that the OTLP exporters allow configuration and default to cumulative, I think we're good enough. It's not the greatest. There's no perfect default here, though, I think, is what we know.
John, are you okay with that?
And then I'm okay with that. Oh, John, are you okay with that?
I think, is Tyler on the call? Because I think he knows a lot more about how our exporter for the collector works. And that
I am on the call. Yeah. The idea is to have it support both, come through the collector, and then being able to parse it there. Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay.
Yeah, and one thing I know, for example, is that Lightstep is packaging OTel libraries with what we're calling launchers, which are basically just a thin wrapper around OpenTelemetry with the settings that we know we need. And this is one vendor-specific setting where if the user is not running any Lightstep code at all, they might get it wrong, and we can tell them what to do. But if you just use our code, it'll work right. And then maybe that's something we can do as vendors to help users in this situation. But it should be a simple configuration.
Yeah, good. There is the next issue that is affecting OTLP that I would like to make a decision on is 725. The one that I filed. Again, the decision may be we just support deltas for up-down counters. That's it. But I try to summarize my thoughts about why we should not support this. Again, the decision may be just for this specific case, we do support deltas. We'll figure out later what to do if you.
Yeah, so I think my read is the problem is that if you're losing your updates, your sums are going to be incorrect. And part of me thinks that that's the nature of the beast. If you're dealing with deltas, you shouldn't be counting totals, and maybe then you're looking at negative rates and such. But I also feel that, well, I was going to mention in the last brief conversation that there's this notion that I had of calling it a pass-through, so that some observers and up-down some observers would come out as cumulative, and up-down counter would come out as deltas because it's the zero memory configuration. But in this, if we adopt the default that we just discussed, Yang is going to make a change. We're going to have OTLP default to cumulative. Then this problem is addressed by default, I think, because the SDK will compute the sum.
Correct.
So if you choose cumulative, this is not a problem.
Correct. That's true. But so I would like us to think a bit more in the future and say, right now, yes, we do choose cumulative and we believe about this and all of these things. But in the future, do we believe that we will have an infrastructure to support this? Or we believe that we should never support this in our infrastructure and we should just drop support?
Well, I don't know that my opinion is strong enough to, I feel like this debate is not worth having, I guess. I feel like it's one of these cases where you get into question of, is something meaningful and is it useful? I think it's meaningful, and I think what you're saying is it's not useful. And I don't know that being useless and meaningful as enough of a reason to take something out, but I think there's a nice amount of symmetry that we have here by just saying you can be delta or cumulative, period. And
Okay.
the fact that up-down counter is different from counter is minor to me. Like isn't delta sum for counter also error prone?
Josh,
And
so
I guess this doesn't concern me. I think that you can always say to the, if you care, you should make yours stateful, which means do cumulative. But then the high card now,
so
yeah,
Josh, you are breaking very.
I suggest you speak. I don't know if my internet's back. Do you want to take over this meeting then for a moment?
You're doing good. I think it just came back. But it might also be helpful to turn off your video. I think is what Bogdan was also recommending. I think that, Richie also pointed out in the comments that it's important as the internal structure is how that's actually stored internally. And I think that there's a really good point to be made about the correctness of the data as it's coming through. But it's also, I think, a perspective of the users. If a user really wants to do something that is going to not work, I think that there's ways that we can help them fix that, but I don't know if it's something we need to, I think, focus a lot of time on before the GA. I think it's a good issue that we could work on after the GA, but I don't know.
The only problem with working after GA is if we decide to remove them, it will be a breaking change. If we decide and if we figure out that this will be a bad thing to have, it will be a breaking change. If we start with only monotonic sums and say that we can add them later, the non-monotonic sums, and still be backwards compatible. That's where I stand for. Like, I know maybe this is not the way how everyone thinks, but for me it's this way. Like, adding things will be backwards compatible, removing things will not be. If we have doubts about things, maybe we should just call them and remove them for the moment, because will be possible to add them in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that that's a really good point. It needs to get resolved sooner rather than later, though, is I think the only follow-up to that.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed.
What does it really mean?
Sorry, go ahead.
What does it really mean? What does it really mean to support like what's different between monotonic counters and non-monotonic counters in this situation? I don't see a difference.
The only difference is most likely for most of the monotonic counters, people are only interested in rates. And because of that, they are not necessarily interested in how much network I consumed from a week ago when I deployed the service. They are most likely interested in how much network I consume per second.
Which is usually the case for counter, but one very nice property of any monotonic counter is if it goes down, you know a reset happened. So you transport a lot of context if you simply define a counter as monotonic.
Yes. The reset can be determined from the start time, but can also be determined from going down. There are two ways.
If it's monotonic. If it's not monotonic, you lose that property.
If it's not monotonic, you can only use the start time, which I know Prometheus does not use right now. And but
we'll start using it, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. But still, the problem is if you lose a delta, if you lose a point, for a counter, besides the fact that you are able to recognize reset and stuff, most likely you don't lose too many informations because you're never gonna look at the current value. So if you drop a delta between report, like if you drop a delta, it's my point was like, if you don't look at the current value of that counter, never, you can drop a delta. If you look at the current value, you cannot drop a delta.
If you drop a delta, you lose that part of your rate because that traffic never happened for you.
Correct.
If you have a complete counter, you might see a spike in your data, which is not correct because obviously you lost a sample over a time, but you're not losing the complete rate information. So if you do calculations based on that rate, which deduce the total amount of transmission, that will work if you do cumulative with monotonic rise. It will not work with non-monotonic. It will not work with deltas.
Why do you say, I mean, you can do an interpolation if you lose a delta and you can assume that the rate between during that time was, I mean, there are ways to work around this for saving memory.
You can assume, yes, but you don't know. And if you start guessing within your monitoring system, you better make sure you really surface this to the user because that violates a lot of principles. Mm-hmm. Like if you start guessing and interpolating automatically, you're breaking user trust, in my opinion, because the user relies on that data being exact or not there. But just guessing without exposing this fact to the user seems counterintuitive.
Okay. So I want to point out, probably don't want to go too deep into this. We've already had this conversation 2 weeks ago. But yeah, to Rich's point, like that's a really good point. And I think that if you have a contract with your user and you are making strong guarantees around the correctness of it, that makes a lot of sense. But that may not be, I think, the universal case. There may be systems that don't have as strong a contract of correctness with their users, and being able to support that use case is also, I think, something that would be useful for them to consider. Yeah, the point of correctness is definitely something that is useful, the monotonic element of the counter. But the goal, I think, in the whole project is also, is there a use that we're going to lose by not including this if we do remove this from the instruments? If there's not an up-down counter, are we compatible with other systems?
I'm not saying to remove up-down counter. I'm just saying that when we put things on the wire, we don't put deltas for up-down counter. There is an up-down counter instrument, but on the wire, we put always the current value. We don't put the change. So up-down counter, or you do a +1, -1, +1, -1 multiple times during the app. But the proposal here is mostly for OTLP to not support just a delta since your previous report, to support the cumulative value always for these up-down things.
Oh.
Again, it's not about removing the instrument. It's about on the wire to always put cumulative for this instrument.
Sorry, yeah, and that's specifically when you're sending to the OTLP?
It's specific to OTLP, yes.
Then yeah, sure, that sounds fine to me. I mean, yeah, if it would prevent data loss within the system of OpenTelemetry, that seems reasonable. It sounds like there's going to be some memory issues, possibly, I think what Josh is saying. But
that's the reason why I don't. That's the reason why I want this option. Is that if I have to keep sums for my up-down counters, I have to keep memory, and I find the arguments that I'm hearing to be valid for some systems, but not universal, as Tyler said. So I guess but I don't care. I don't want to slow us down. So like, honestly, this is something we can add later. It's not something I care about too much. And so I'd rather see us move forward and I don't need to win this one, or you know, I don't need deltas of up-down counters on the wire.
I'm trying to think of how it's currently implemented, which is pretty bad because I wrote that for the Go stuff. I should probably remember it. But It seems like if you, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I added this PR in the Go SDK that would compute cumulatives from deltas. So the Yang proposal to set the default to be cumulative will get the right behavior by default. And the question is whether we ever want to support deltas for up-down counters. And I still don't really agree with the arguments of why counter is different than up-down counter, but I would rather see this debate end than keep debating it. So, I'm willing to go with the recommendation that Bogdan and Rich are making.
Let's go with that, and I will put together two PRs: one that changes to the current state, and one that shows how we can backwards compatible change to support this in the future. Does it make sense? To prove that we have a path forward, we do a decision right now, but if we decide this to be useful and we find better arguments and we find really use cases for this, this is how we support it. Make sense for everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So then, okay, if somebody can document this in the issue while we are going to the next one. The last one for me that is blocking is 617. If you can present that one, 617.
617?
Yes.
That's old.
And I would like to have a decision on this one. If people would like to see a PR right now to add support to this in OTLP, and I can do it, but I would like to make a decision of if this is important enough for our GA to have a PR right now, and I'll do it.
So for me, there was a potential overlap with exemplars, and as we all know, as I stated at the beginning, like I would like to see us finish something. So if leaving out raw values is necessary to do now, and maybe the questions that were raised in this issue that you asked me to give feedback on, maybe those are part of the problem we haven't made any progress. But exemplars and raw values are very close to each other, and yet if this is slowing us down, let's forget about it.
It's not slowing down. It's just like I would like to know if people believe it's important enough for me to spend time, craft a PR to have them in OTLP before we can call it stable.
Is there any reason that somebody else couldn't draft a PR?
Or somebody else to draft a PR? But again, do we call this a requirement for GA? Like, do we want to see a PR merged for this or not before calling stable? That's the question that.
Yeah, I probably don't have the context because I saw Connor's PR and that looked pretty like, I don't know, done to me. So maybe I just am missing something.
Yeah, isn't this close? So the assertion is that this raw value can be used either as an exemplar or as a raw value. And the way I think about that is that there's this sample count field. If you omit sample count, the implication is this is a raw value because its value is 1. Every raw exemplar represents 1, it's raw data. If you put a value that is, well, actually, sorry, that doesn't quite work. But the point is, if this value is greater than 1, it's a probabilistic sample. Maybe if this value is 1, it's a raw value. And if this value is not set, you don't know. That's possible.
There are more than that. There are more implications than that. For me, if we support directly raw measurements from the synchronous instruments, which is the most the focused one, I would put this into the list of where there is a repeated field for every data point. I would put a repeated field for this because you don't want to send them inside a sum or a histogram. Like you want to send just the raw values, not them.
But that's where, isn't that where this adds them to? This?
No, it adds to every.
Yeah.
So that's.
I didn't read this in a while. I thought that this was a repeated field that was parallel to the others, like you just described, Bogdan. You know,
okay.
like.
maybe that's the solution. It's not this way. It's not gonna work this way, how the PR is crafted right now. Maybe that's the solution. Again.
Sorry, where'd it go? Yeah, I don't know where it went. It's right here. This is
Anyway,
not the right way
so,
to browse. Here it is. So I would have put another one of these, which was raw data point. And if you recall, at some point I tried to combine the two integer and double into a scalar. Part of my motivation was that I wanted to add another one for raw data and exemplars, and that would keep us break even, but don't care.
No.
Yeah.
Let's not do optimizations right now. I will have next week just do this kind of tricky optimizations, combining messages, measure memory and stuff. But let's finish the overall structure and then do the optimizations like that. What I'm trying to say is, should we have a repeated field here as well? Initially, my thought was like, anyway, it seems that you want to have only here, and then from aggregation somehow know if to refer to these as exemplars or stuff.
Yeah, that could be a value type or something like that additionally.
Yes.
And if there's time now, I did list the Python prototype as well as my sort of beginnings of some related work in Go we can get to. There is definitely support for the raw values. It's not clear how strong it is, but I see it, it's there. And one of the more, like, you could argue that, you know, as OpenTelemetry, we've done our jobs, we've created an API SDK separation. A different SDK could be implemented to do raw values, but it wouldn't use OTLP, and it might not be what the user wants. So,
quick thing. By the way, we need this to put a bit of context. We need this for some languages like PHP, where there is no such thing as a state or as a global state or something where you can do aggregations. So in PHP, we may need this because it's not easy to do aggregations.
Right.
That's.
Well, I think you're answering your own question.
Not an expert of PHP, but somebody told me
I've heard that too.
And I heard this is a requirement. Yes, I answer my own question, but I don't want to make all the decisions. I want people to also prove me wrong or right in some of these things.
Well, I support this. The one thing that I got hung up on earlier when I realized it, I said at the very beginning, before you dialed in, is that we have to avoid recombining metrics that were computed from the same source. So if I have, you know, compute a histogram and I compute exemplars, I want to make sure that they don't end up looking like duplicates of each other. You know, if I'm doing probabilistic sampling and I compute my exemplars, I can estimate approximate data from the exemplars. If I do that and I combine it with a histogram, which was an exact summary of the same data, now I've got duplicate data. We have to watch out for that problem. So that was a concern for me for multiple views when I talked about view configuration. That's my strongest concern right now. But I think if we just state clearly that raw values may be raw data and they may be exemplars, and if they're exemplars, don't combine them as real data, you know, essentially.
But we need
or
to
be
have
careful
a way
how you use them.
We need to have a way to signal in every type. I think we need to have a way to signal that, hey, there are, so if we go, depends on how we model this in the protocol, but we have to clearly state that this type comes with exemplars or something like that, and make sure we understand that exactly what you pointed, like, but.
My attitude had been that if you just include exemplars, just go ahead and do it. If you actually are giving raw data, change the value type to indicate, and that will say whether the data is in the raw data or whether it's just helpful extra data. That's what I would do, but it's not the only way to do it. Then if we may move forward, go ahead, Bogdan, please.
Just comment this idea on that exemplars PR or just to have there. In the meantime, I know what I have next to do to tune a bit the protocol for 725 and 731, and I will send PRs very soon. Anyone else, if you want to do PRs, just assign the issues to yourself. I don't answer Tyler. I don't have to do all the PRs, but
yeah,
I dedicated
I feel like
for this. So
I'm glad you're doing this. I will work on an SK spec, so I'm not going to do these PRs. I wanted to move us forward. This is sort of on the same topic. So I've looked over Connor's PR. Remember, he's an intern who will not be with us for much longer, but this is it. And it does implement both the trace exemplars as well as the statistical exemplars that I was interested in. So there is a way to think about how a statistical exemplars can be the data as opposed to just auxiliary information. And this gets down to this question about extra labels. So I said I would answer this after the meeting. I don't want to do it now, but if you're following along, what is it called? Excluded? Sorry. Filtered. I can't remember. Connor, are you on the call?
Dropped labels.
Oh, dropped. Yeah. So dropped. Yeah. So what Connor's done, and I discussed in the PR, is there's a couple ways I could imagine doing it. But the aggregators in this case are getting the set of labels that were dropped. And that's, if you're going to do dimensionality reduction, the sensible place to do it is at the moment where you're computing your exemplars, because the exemplars then can contain full information, and then the rest of the accumulator state can build up reduced state. So one approach here is to give the aggregators themselves the information that they need to compute exemplars. In the comments for this PR, I just noted that I could imagine doing it another way. And you may look at my PR here, which is related. And this, I think this is enough. This is all background on this question about how we represent raw data. In this PR, which is a draft, I don't intend to merge it as is, I added ability to filter label sets. This would be done first thing in the accumulator. And this is a way we can configure essentially a lower cost. So we're going to drop the labels that don't matter to us up front before we compute the accumulator state. But that is also the moment where you want to do some exemplar calculation. So if I search for the word filter in this, you can see here, well, let me go into the actual SDK code. That's down below. I shouldn't have done it that way. Oh, I shouldn't be searching in real time. The point being here is that I added to the label set an ability to construct a new label set and a filter. So you pass in a predicate, which says true or false for every label key. And then in the SDK, here we are, what it does is, at the moment where it would ordinarily compute a label set, it filters that label set.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to configure a filter, which might be a regular expression, it might be a map of strings to true or false, some configuration, it doesn't matter how, it's got configured somehow. And what it's going to do is it's going to return the effective label set, which is the one that is going to be used as a map key. So this is reducing the dimensionality, and it returns a value that I am ignoring in this PR. This is the one, this is value that I would use to compute a statistical exemplar with additional information. So this is the dropped labels that Connor computed. And I pointed out in Connor's PR that one way to do it is to pass the dropped labels to the aggregators. And this is a nice way to do it because if you want to follow this sort of tradition, the histogram aggregator will compute one exemplar per bucket. The histogram then needs to know the labels that were dropped before it can fill out each bucket. But there are ways, and it's a little bit more complicated, to do a general purpose calculation here. But then you lose the easy way to control where the exemplars lie. And that is a more complicated question. I don't actually want to settle this now. But go ahead.
I would also think about performance implications of this. Remember, this is going to happen for every measurement recorded. So haven't thought very well on this, but just to point out that it will be good to make sure that any implementation that we follow should have reasonable performance that we don't.
Yeah. So I will say that in this version I did as best I could. I kept the existing performance roughly speaking. So the existing performance is like, we count allocations very carefully. You get one slice for your keys and values, and it sorts them in place to deduplicate them, and it moves them to the end so that it can be idempotent. And then what it does is it filters them and moves them again. So it is calling these filters. It does not require any new allocations, which felt really important to me. And I think when I was sort of more distant from this topic, when I was thinking, oh, I want to reduce dimensionality. You remember early on, we had this thing called the default keys aggregator, or sorry, default keys batcher. It was a processor in today's terminology. If you wait till the processor to compute reduction of dimensionality, you pay the cost of high dimensionality in the accumulator. So this approach here saves it. It also fits very nicely with the work that Connor did on exemplars. So this feels right to me. It also doesn't feel like essential for us to get to GA. So I want to, go ahead.
Some experience here with census from Google. We ended up not reducing, so we ended up having some stages. First, the first thing, we compute a 1 second delta inside the aggregator without reducing any cardinality or anything, to not do any string comparison and anything. Like, it was just blindly put everything together. Yep. If it happens to match labels, good. We aggregate things for 1 second, as much as we can. Then in the next stage, we started to drop things and apply rules like this. So, but keep in mind that for exemplars, we want to keep things that are unique per call, like span ID, trace ID, which will give you troubles. So, not saying that that's the right thing to do what Google did, because what Google did was, again, did not drop any labels, but picked some exemplars from this initial 1 second mini delta thing to save for the trace ID, span ID. And then kind of these were the exemplars that you state. So it was super randomly chosen. That
approach does work. I want to say that approach does work, to me at least. So it's a question of whether there's benefit of reducing dimensionality before you build up a big map of high cardinality, I think. This is not the only way to do it. I guess I felt like this was going to be a slight advantage in performance to never index those high cardinality combinations and only do something expensive here if you cared to get those exemplars.
Yes. So
I would be happy to leave this debate open and you know, let it play out slowly.
Quick thing. In census, inside Google, there was another thing that was very important. There were multiple views for the same instrument. So, and one thing that this mini delta did was computing all possible aggregations. So instead of every view will have different requirements for the reduction of the labels. So in order to not do all the reductions for every view, what we did in this mini delta, we dropped we did not do the reduction of the labels yet, but we computed every possible aggregation. Like if there was a histogram and the sum and whatever, we made a merged aggregation or whatever. And then from there, we started to split in real views, in real, like, you need a sum. Here is the sum for this. You may do more aggregation, more reduction, or whatever. Anyway, I can explain.
Okay, so that's viable. Maybe that's the better way to go. I think we shouldn't let this slow us down. So somehow we ought to figure out whether we can just decide on a protocol for raw values without debating this, because those are two viable ways to go. And it could be just a performance question. Maybe it's not that important.
And I also think we can change. It's the internal detail of how we compute things. As long as this is the input, this is the output.
Right. We shouldn't specify this at the SDK level either. These are two valid approaches, and I don't think it matters much.
Thank you.
Okay, we have hit the end of an hour. we didn't get to the stuff at the end about Cortex, although I have been talking privately with the Cortex team, and I just want to say that the Amazon is contributing a lot of work on Cortex. It's coming along nicely. If you see those issues in the collector or the Go contrib repos, please pay attention if you are interested.
In the collector one, I'm actively reviewing. I put a lot of comments there. Josh, if you want to follow up more, but I'm doing an active review for the contrib. I did not look at that, my fault, but I'm focused.
That's okay. I have taken a look at that one. Okay, we'll help out there, and anyone else who's interested, please contribute. Thank you all. I think we have reached the end, and let's keep going towards GA. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Okay.
See you.
Thanks.
Next time.